The passage tells us about a situation where Federer made a response to a reporter's question. This is, of course, talking about Roger Federer. Not necessary for us to answer the question, but the more you know. When this reporter asked Federer if he was the best player ever, Federer replied, as in, he was not about to proclaim himself the best ever. The best player of this generation, yes, he said, but nowhere close to ever. Just look at the records that some guys have. I am a minnow. Then we have the blank. Let's look at the options. A says, his win against Agassi, a genius from the previous generation, contradicts that. This here we are talking about Andre Agassi. Again, the more you know, but not necessary for us to answer the question. His win against Agassi, a genius from a previous generation, contradicts that. Now, this is a bit of a change of argument. Now, one might think that it sort of concludes the argument, but it doesn't. What it does is the passage ends with the statements by Federer, which shows that he was not about to proclaim himself the best ever. So he kind of gives a good, solid diplomatic answer saying, look at the records some guys have. We're talking about, but nowhere close to ever. Maybe the best player of this generation, but not the best player ever. Just look at the records that some guys have. I am a minnow. Where Federer is talking about the records that some guys have, in all probability is talking about people from the previous generation, of course, because he says the best player of this generation, yes, but nowhere close to ever. So first off, does it contradict that? Not quite certainly, not definitively. Secondly, we are talking about in option A, we are talking about whether Federer's statement is true or not. That's not the focus of the passage. The passage is about how Federer responds to this question, which is an exaggerated question asking, was he the best player ever? What was he going to say? Yes, I am the best player ever. No, he says maybe of this generation, but not ever, nowhere close to ever. So this doesn't quite fit. It sort of changes the argument. We might have a change of argument at the end of a passage. It is the end of the paragraph, so we don't know where the following statements, the statements after this this passage, they go. So we are not certain. A might fit. Let's see if we can find a better option. B says, Sampras, the king of an earlier generation, was as humble. Now this is much better than A. This is talking about Pete Sampras. Again, not necessary for us to answer the question, but the more you know. It says Sampras, the king of an earlier generation, was as humble. So we see a comparison made here on the aspect of humbleness. And this is exactly what we mean by saying Federer is certainly not lacking in confidence, but he was not about to proclaim himself the best ever. So what he says, the best player of this generation, yes, but nowhere close to ever. Just look at the records that some guys have. I am a minnow compared to people from previous generations, people who have amazing records. What we see here in Federer's statement is an example of his humbleness. And then we draw a comparison with Sampras, saying that he was just as humble. So this fits quite perfectly because we have an example of, we have an instance of humbleness. And then the concluding statement, it says that someone else, say Sampras, was as humble as Federer was when Federer made this statement. So comparatively and logically, it fits quite well. It is better than A because it continues and concludes the argument in the passage, while A, as we now understand, changes the argument slightly. So we can qualify B as a valid answer, and we can eliminate A. Option C tells us he is more than a minnow to his contemporaries. Now, more than a minnow to his contemporaries might seem correct according to this statement, but that is just what Federer says. Then again, this is very similar to option A. Whether his statement is true or not, that is being assessed here. It is not a situation where one needs to assess whether his statement is true or not, whether there's information or evidence that contradicts it or such, whether he is a minnow or he's not. Doesn't make a difference. what's happening here is that Federer makes a statement which is a humble statement, which befits someone of his stature, that he is not going to say that I'm the best player ever. He talks about, he sort of refers to people from the previous generations. Look at the records that some guys have. So this is very similar to A. It is a change of argument. So we don't need a change of argument because we have a better connecting statement in B, a more directly connected statement in B. And then also, this is something which need not necessarily be true. That's not the, it might be true outside of the premise of the passage, but that's outside information. We don't bring that into the argument here, into the solving of this question. It's not needed. Based on the given information, we cannot say that this is necessarily true. So C can be eliminated. Even by comparison, B is a better choice. Option D says the difference between the best of this generation and the best ever is a matter of perception. Again, this not only goes into something completely irrelevant, whether the best of this generation and the best ever, are they different? Are they the same? Is it a matter of perception? Are there actual factual things which define these or differentiate these? Irrelevant, doesn't make a difference. Then also, the assessment of Federer's statement is not required. What we have in Federer's statement is a very good example of him being humble. Essentially what is suggested here, but he was not about to proclaim himself the best ever. Why was he not about to proclaim himself the best ever? Because he's a humble person. And so we cannot say that this is this or that is that. No, because we have an instance of humbleness. We have humble mentioned in B. That's exactly what we need. That's the most directly connected statement. By comparison, D is weak. And then D again goes into an assessment of his statements, of Federer's statements, which is not needed at all. So D can be eliminated. The most appropriate answer is option B.